Jay, would you actually give me sharing capabilities just for an image?
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then...
Jay, would you actually give me sharing capabilities?
Oh, sorry about that. There's a delay going on. Yeah. Okay, without further ado, let's welcome Jess Arndt.
Hi, sorry about that. Can you hear me? Are we delaying?
Yes.
We're here. Okay, great. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining on a Saturday morning. I am so excited to be here, and this week so far has been awesome. Thank you, V and Asiya and Alejandro for your awesome talks, and everybody for your beautiful workshop participation. And I just could not be more excited to be a part of this in person and virtually, and however this year and ongoing. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about an idea, and an idea that is a feeling, and maybe to always be holding idea and feeling together versus so leaning against the mind-body divide at all times. But I'm kind of throwing out what I call kind of a fake term, like queer somatic realism, but fake in that all kind of categories are fake. And so in that way important. And I thought I made some notes that I'd like to, I'll read from, and then we'll do a little writing. But I thought we would also start with a little bit of writing just to kind of get us in the zone, just maybe like 3 to 4 minutes of writing. And the prompt is, write down something that you can't find or can't explain or have never seen or felt described in language. And because part of this is trying to access what's maybe complicated about getting one's full experience into language, it might be a drawing, it might be a word cloud, it might be a cloud, but just spend some time trying to write down something or find on the page something that you can't explain or have never seen or felt described in language. We'll just go for like 3 minutes. Okay. So why don't you find the end of your thought and just leave this writing somewhere accessible because we'll return to it in a little bit. You know, and now you've done the impossible. We've tried the impossible already. So things could only possibly be a little more possible from here. So today I want to talk a little bit about 3D writing, what I call 3D writing, and queer somatic realism, which again, spoiler alert, this is a fake term, as all categories are in some way fake terms, right? This talk, this experience that we're sharing now, is a first stab at trying to articulate something that I've been thinking about a lot. And because what it's describing is a crisis with language, talking about it is also hard. So we'll kind of do it together. And then at the end, would love to talk about it if we have time, and see any questions or ideas that you might have. But what I've been thinking about is this problem, that the queer writing that most speaks to my lived experience is marked by speculative elements, or is in some way marked as speculative. The exciting thing is also the same. So it's a problem and it's an excitement, right? And part of what makes it a problem is that I can't live if my body's only in fantasy space, right? So these are the things that I'm starting to think about. And the emperor's wearing no clothes news is that I'm talking to you from a non-conforming body, a body that I make up daily. So in other words, my feeling that what we call speculative in queer writing is more often like a queer realism isn't an academic debate about literary categories, but part of my always urgent negotiation with language. And I'm inviting us today to all be part of that urgent negotiation with language, right? And it's asking, like Kazim Ali does in his essay, or their essay, Genre Queer Notes on Generic Binaries, is language adequate to define experience? In this case, a queer body experience that's out there on the ragged and always evolving little protected edge. Realism here, in an unmarked form, being defined as writing that purports to be able to access something true or lived or real about a broad swath of human life through techniques that eschew what we might call fantasy, supernatural, or speculative elements. So this is different than literary gatekeeping, but more like a bid for being. And Ali continues, I'm not talking about cross-genre or mixed-genre books. Rather, I mean books whose genre is unto themselves, whose whole texts live with bodies ungenred as gender queer bodies, take their own gender unto themselves, neither accepting one category or another. So as a backdrop, in 2017, I published my first collection of stories, Large Animals, with Catapult Press. The stories were mostly consumed with the problem of having a body. What is it? What do you do with it? Do you have it? Does it have you? This corporeally motley quality that was occupied by queer non-binary questions but wanted to stay away from identity-based answers meant that the book didn't fit tidily into pre-existing publishing containers. In my experience, having a body rarely does. And my work has since continued to orient around a couple of questions or polls. One comes directly from a talk Fred Moten and Saidiya Hartman gave called The Black Outdoors. In it, Fred Moten says, there's that phrase about what it means to be sure of yourself, but I mean it in a slightly different way. Not sure of yourself in the sense of confident or competent, but sure of yourself as in sure that you are a self, sure that you have a self. So that's one. The other comes from trans femme poet Imogen Christian Smith's essay, Between Forever and Wherever You Are, a Non-Binary Trans Poetics. And they ask how to write a body that's unstable, question mark. and followed by saying, there's no one answer to this question, and so non-binary trans poetics can be any practices, generative, transdisciplinary, somatic, always subversive, that seek an endless praxis of asking. In my practice as a mostly fiction and prose writer, these two questions might occupy different sides of a similar coin. One, in a cultural context that often either wants to ignore or annihilate you, how can you be sure you are or have a self? Two, if we assume legible bodies are necessary prerequisites for selfness, and if selfness is what you're supposed to use to write with, then how do I or you write? Poet C.A. Conrad has a practice around this called somatic rituals. You guys are probably familiar with it. But in it, part of what Conrad does is they press their body or bodies to other objects. Bananas, gemstones, pennies, trees. And Conrad says, my idea for a somatic poetics is a poetry which investigates that seemingly infinite space between body and spirit by using nearly any possible thing around or of the body to channel that body out of or in towards spirit with deliberate and sustained concentration. And to some degree, that's like a practice that I'm seeing in these kind of queer writers that I want to talk about, and also maybe identifying in my own work, and maybe kind of offering it to us as a potentially useful way to orient. So, and with Conrad, they refer to this kind of work as inhabiting, in quotes, the extreme presence. And C.A. Conrad, if you haven't heard them talk, they talk very meaningfully about in their own life, identifying a crisis of sorts where they couldn't write in the presence, and using these somatic rituals as a way to try to get back towards the possibility of extreme presentness or presentness. So to my mind, the provisional space of the extreme present is where queer and non-conforming bodies are made. And like I said, back to kind of the opening, to me, I feel like my body is something that I'm asked to make daily, even minute by minute, right? So to continue with Imogen Christian Smith's thinking, they say, to write the non-binary body, the body between and beyond bodies, is to give oneself permission to undermine agreed upon bodies in order to touch living body. And I take this to mean writing that's not, in quotes, about body in any kind of conventional way, but is itself the only place a possibility of that living body and the feelings that attend to it might exist. So take, for instance, and this was kind of part of what I described, wanting to talk about Megan Milks' Slug. And I think that Megan might be part of the program in the winter. So take, for instance, Megan Milks' Slug, a story where, at least at the outset, a cis straight woman, Patty, turns into a giant slug. The slug comes in her window, turns into a giant slug, and has slug sex with Slug, who has come in her window. It's a really great story, guys. Yeah. Ryan, I see you, yes. Of it, though, Milk says in another story so that story was something that they wrote, 10 years ago, and it's been republished in Slug and Other Stories, which is like a great new collection, or pretty new collection from Feminist Press. And the last story in that collection is a story called Patrick Gets Inspired. And in it, Milk talks directly about writing Slug. The narrator in Patrick Gets Inspired is a Milks-like character who has been tasked with trying to write a coronavirus-related porn story and is kind of lamenting the fact that they can't somehow find the juice that they found while writing Slug. They also talk about how Slug was a story written as a pornographic story to try to get a date before they'd had sex with another body. So there's a lot going on in that story, right? But I'm going to read just a little bit from Patrick Gets Inspired, where the Milks Like narrator is talking about slug. And they say, and this is on page 244 of the book, in 2013, someone emailed me to ask why I had chosen to make slug male. And this is the slug that comes in the window. It seemed that the transformation would have been more complete and fulfilling if the slug had been referred to as a female, although slugs are both male and female. This is from the email. She wanted it to be a lesbian story. I replied, the story to me is about shifting, yes, from straight to queer sexuality, but most of all to a new queer embodiment. It's not only the heteronormativity of the straight world that Patty is suffocating from, but also, more importantly, perhaps, the confines of the body itself. Though I don't use the word trans, and this is in parentheses, I wasn't trans yet, slug is a trans story. Patty grows a new body, becomes something new, something big and slimy. Anyway, he and she can mean anything. Okay, so that's one example. Another one is a writer who I'm not sure, hopefully you guys know, an Australian writer, a trans Australian writer, Tom Cho, from this really great collection of stories called Look Who's Morphine, from Arsenal Pulp Press. And here's a brief description of the book from a reviewer is, change is the sole constant theme throughout Look Who's Morphine. Cho's perpetually transforming narrator never stays firmly rooted in one location, body, or time period for long. He becomes a plush cast member on the set of Jim Henson's Muppet Show, Whitney Houston's bodyguard, leather-clad bass player Susie Quattro, Captain Von Trapp's secret paramour, the Incredible Hulk, a Godzilla-sized cock rock guitar god playing for adoring fangirls in Tokyo. Just when you think you've caught on, Cho brings his extended family into the mix, and Uncle's hard drive crashes, and Aunt is demonically possessed by a plastic breast-adorned novelty apron, and another uncle turns into Tony Danza. So that's some of what's going on content-wise or surface-wise in the book, right? Morphine is essential to bodied life, is part of what it feels like Cho is getting at. And I wanted to read to you a little tiny bit from, all these stories are like 3 pages long, okay? And so much is happening in them, but a little bit from my favorite story in the collection, which is called Dirty Dancing, and literally kind of does a gloss on Dirty Dancing, the movie. In it, the narrator is with an aunt and uncle at a camp, meets a dude, wants to start having sex with him, and feels that they can't in their own body, so makes up a character, makes up a body Bruce, who is, unlike the narrator, Caucasian, very built, like kind of a 70s sex god style, Tom of Finland kind of character, and he and Johnny, Bruce and Johnny, start getting it on, right? Bruce and Johnny want to bring their love to Auntie Fang, Bruce's aunt, and are hoping that it will be accepted. It's not. Okay, so this is where I'm going to start reading. It's on page 10. It turns out that Auntie Fang is not pleased about them being together at all. So the narrative eye is looking at Bruce, who they've created. Bruce is having sex with Johnny, right? It turns out that Auntie Fang is not pleased about them being together at all, and I look on as she forbids Bruce from seeing Johnny. Auntie Fang tells Bruce that he and Johnny need to have a relationship that is more like the one she has with Uncle Stan. Uncle Stan first met Auntie Fang when he went on a business trip to Shanghai in 1968. Uncle Stan then brought Auntie Fang over to Australia to be his wife. Theirs is a marriage of convenience. She has a type of green algae growing on her, and he has a rare type of fungus growing on him, such that her green algae receives water and nutrient salts from his fungus, and in turn, his fungus gains nutrients synthesized from her green algae. Bruce tells Auntie Fang that he could never have a relationship as perfect as the one she and Uncle Stan have, but Auntie Fang still refuses to give him and Johnny her approval. Thus, over the next few days, things are not looking so good for Bruce and Johnny. But a few nights later in Johnny's cabin, there is a breakthrough. Bruce is right in the middle of having sex with Johnny when he discovers that Johnny has a special kind of intracellular methane oxidizing bacteria in his hair. And Bruce's own body produces a particular kind of enzyme such that Johnny's bacteria is able to convert methane to a form that Bruce can use for nutrition. And in turn, Bruce's enzyme protects Johnny from the harmful hydrogen peroxide that is a byproduct of Johnny's sulfur metabolizing process. So Bruce and Johnny talk over the situation with me, and then the three of us go see Auntie Fang, and Bruce and Johnny show her Johnny's bacteria and Bruce's enzyme, and then I watch as Johnny says to Auntie Fang, no one puts baby in a corner, and he performs a big raunchy dance number with Bruce after he says it, and everyone else in the resort joins in and starts dancing in a raunchy way too. Okay. And then just one more kind of, well, there's sort of two more sort of examples of this, right? One, in the story that I read on Tuesday, if for those of you who are part of the reading, it's called Zoop, and in it, a pretty hapless narrator is on an ice-breaking expedition in the Arctic and feels like an unexpected camaraderie with the ice worms that the expedition is studying. Ice worms, like queer bodies, refracted and dislocated in increasingly tunneled heteronormative space, this writer realizes can't be touched. If they are, they melt. The psychic connection is made literal when the writer returns home to Idaho and becomes one. So this has all made me think, my poetics, I think, or part of my poetics, is to physicalize psychic confusion into 3D space. To make material what is in so many ways immaterial, try to change it, and then somehow reabsorb it, hoping, I guess, that this might help me feel more able to live. Fiction is the place that I do this. And this is part of why, for me, it's really important that fiction, when it's talked about as being a fantasy space or a made-up space, isn't put in a binary opposition with the real. Here, as above, I'm increasingly wondering what happens when we think about these moves, not by marking them as speculative fiction or fantastical, but as a kind of essential expression of what's happening in queer bodies and lives. And again, back to kind of my realization at the start, the queer writing that most speaks to my lived experience is marked by speculative elements. So what does that mean? i.e. is the closest place in language that we or you or I can get to describing the experience of being bodied, being gender nonconforming, being other, as in many ways we all are. Or what if a thought experiment, at least for today, what if we try on, at least for today, is to insist on reading these texts or our own work like this? At very least, we should wonder about a binary speculative versus, in quotes, real. What goes by unmarked contemporary literary realism, after all, communicates very little about the vast, idiosyncratic, polysemic folds of most of our lives. And add in the word corporeal, right? And then I wanted to just kind of like outro with like a little tiny bit from Large Animals that I'll read, just like a couple paragraphs of the title story, and then maybe we'll do just a tiny bit more writing and then talk a little bit if people want to, okay? So in the very short collection of stories, Large Animals, the last story is called Large Animals, and we find another pretty hapless narrator. This time they're stuck out in the desert, totally alone, and they start to be visited by what they call the wall ride, these giant kind of pornographic-ish or very, very protuberant walrus beings who just have kind of showed up, okay? So here we go. I had things I was supposed to be doing, more work than I could accomplish, even if I duct taped my fist to my laptop, but none of it seemed relevant to my current state. In the afternoons, I drove back home slowly, always stopping for 6 packs of beer at the Circle K. I enjoyed the task. The beer evaporated once I stuck it in the fridge. It was there, and then it was gone. My sleeping area was simple, a bed on a plywood platform, a wooden dresser, built-in closets, and a cement floor. At first, I would wake up in the night from the sheer flattening silence of the desert. It was impossible that the world still existed elsewhere. After that initial jolt, relief. Don't you miss it? My same friend said during our weekly telephone chats. But I couldn't explain the euphoria of walking up and down the chilly aisles of Stater Brothers in week-old sweatpants if I wanted, uncounted by life. Would I buy refried or whole beans, this brand or that? It didn't matter, no one cared. It was in these conditions that the wall ride arrived. I'd slept as usual for the first few hours, heavily in a kind of coma state. Then had woken, I thought, to pee. But lying there with the gritty sheets braided around me, the violet light that was created from the fly zapper, the desert cold that was entering through the gaps and cracks in the fire's absence, I felt a new form of suffocation. It wasn't supernatural. I'd also had that, the sense of someone's vast weight sitting on the bed with you or patting your body with ghostly hands. This breathless feeling was larger, as if I was uniformly surrounded by mammoth flesh. Dream parts snagged at me, slapping sounds and hose-like alien respiration. I felt I was wrestling within inches of what must be, since I couldn't breathe, the end of my life. Now the lens of my dream panned backward and I saw my opponent in his entirety. He lay, if that's what you could call it, on my bed, thick and wrinkled, the creases in his hide so deep I could stick my arms between them. His teeth were yellow and as long as my legs. I'm sexually dormant, I said aloud to him, but I want to put my balls in someone's face. Then somehow light was peeling everything back for dawn. So that's just a little bit of that story. But a place where I think some of this stuff that we've been talking about is kind of going on. So maybe we'll kind of stop there and try a little bit of writing and then do a little talking. How does that sound? Yeah? Okay. So there's not like a way to do this writing per se. It's more, the room affirms the plan. Okay. So it's not a strategy towards a literary effect, and you can't do it wrong. But something that Megan Milks has said is that whenever they come to like a point of stuckness or complication, they always return to their body. So I want to take this, their body or bodies, right? We all have many, I would guess. So I want to take this first writing that we did and try to in some way like localize it or physicalize it. So for a few minutes, and I'll put this in the chat, go back to what you were writing at the beginning and without taming it down, place it in or as your body. Is there a shape or a location, a smell, a goo? How does it feel? Do you need to maybe appendagize it? Is there a place you can nestle it in? Start describing that. And again, you can't do it wrong. I'll put it in the chat. And while you guys are doing that, I'm just going to put up my favorite Ligia Clark, who was a Brazilian artist, visual artist, one of their images, which I get a lot from when thinking about this stuff. And this piece is called the I and the U. Okay, and we'll do one more little bit of writing. So now to some degree, you've translated a feeling or refound a feeling, or something that has felt inexpressible into a physical location in your body. And maybe to do it, you add it onto your body. Maybe to do it, you found a part of your body that you didn't know was there. Now you're going to write like a scene, and we're going to do this fast. So just in like 4 or 5 minutes, you're going to write a scene, whatever that means to you, where without negotiation, so this part just exists. This is just part of you, this shape that you have now. That place in your body is somehow essential in external terms to your day. So somehow this part of your body becomes the thing that's needed. This place becomes the thing that's needed to get you through your day. And this scene is going to explore that. Okay. I'll put that in the chat as well.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Find a pausing place. And if everyone's down, let's all find from all the writing that you've done today, one word or phrase that you don't mind sharing into the chat. It could be a sentence, could be 2 sentences, could be a fragment, could be a word. I guess you guys don't in the room have your hands on the chat, but maybe Jake, you can say them to Jay and Jay can type them in or something.
Yeah, also you can, if you would like to just come over to the room computer and type it in, you can. I'll stand up and vacate my chair. Put your name or not.
Cabs.
Mhm. These are so excellent, you guys.
Would be during the Zoom.
If you're on Zoom, you can type it in, or if you want to come to my computer, because this is attached to my computer. But if you're already, up,
As the last few are coming in, is there somebody who would volunteer to read this kind of list down? You don't need to read the names of the people who wrote them, but just to kind of read it as a stream.
I can read it.
Great.
Just trying to find the first one.
I think it, in my veins is what I see.
Yeah, okay. In my veins, the satin side feels as close as I can get to my father. Soft, overloaded, gummy military heroes. I resent it, the stickiness. It's like my guardian if my guardian throws its hands up to avoid physical touch. A structure cannot instruct. But the crowd is different. It isn't their crowd, but it is just a different one. The tentacles reach out in all directions, slithering and sliding and suctioning to all surfaces. The brush of the wearer, hopefully I said that right. I'm bumped and the bumper seems mad at me and my throat tickles and my stomach splits and bees pour from my mouth into aisle 4. The sound patterns of casca bells like raindrops on ceiba leaves. I shielded my lips and hips with my arms as the orb changed its ghostly white form to bright red, ending this interaction. The ball itself rolls up my arm, a psychic connection between us two, and becomes in my mouth. They leave scars behind. The exit wounds and scarves and chokers and heavy necklaces are fashionable among the afflicted. My soul is on fire and the inside of my gums burn from the salt. Body zippered in two, two-faced, except without the convenience of flipping a coin to determine decisions and navigate conflict. The glass is always shrinking, imperceptibly so. I mean, in the morning, I note that it feels smaller than it did the day before. Eyes open to eyes closed, in bed, pin prickling, dull sound resounding, a ringing resounding that's rubbing the brain raw from the inside. It is true that if you cut me, I will bleed a very specific story. The tongue is a big worm, writhing a bit warm, and half of a dislocated bone cage. The lips are ships puckering over blips and pops. Nostrils pull space. Inside, tuck the steam in veins that circulate the world, eyeballs painted sea pearls. Something behind my eyes trying to get out, but not tears like you are thinking.
Whoa. Mind blown. Thank you all. We should start every day like that. That's all I got. So thank you guys. Give yourselves a big hand for rolling up your sleeves and getting into it. And we have 10 minutes, so I'm happy to talk if you want to talk. And whatever's great.
Thank you so much, Jess. Do we have a few minutes? Are there any observations or questions or?
I just have a comment. I just want to say, I think I'm just blown by the idea that when you mentioned about how like genre is like gender and books are bodies, that I didn't connect that until now. That is such an interesting observation. I didn't think of that until now, which is very I was so intrigued by it, and just listening to like the slug stories, and it just made me think about like certain medias or like the traditional Princess of the Frog, because now I look at things differently after this. Just like the Princess and the Frog, it's like, okay, maybe this is like, it could be a queer story context, because sometimes traditionally the Princess and the Frog, the princess turned into, or at least like the Disney movie version, it's like the princess kissed the frog, but instead him becoming a prince, she turns into a frog herself. And this can also easily be translated to like a queer storyline, or it's just something that it just really boggles my mind and just really so different. And I'm just in awe about that. And I'm gonna check out Tom Cho. Thank you, Jess.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. What a great comment. And I'm glad you're excited, because I'm excited about it too. And I just put in the chat the essay, Genre Queer Notes Against Generic Binaries. I could share the PDF too. Maybe many of you know it, but it's like super exciting the whole way through, and really makes a lot of space. Yeah, it will. Thanks, Asela. Trippy, awesome.
Well,
Christina, great.
Let's give Jess that hand.
Thanks, hands to you all. And happy to talk more about this, like in person or passing in or whatever. So.
Awesome. All right, we have an hour.